What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. Well, as expected yesterday, an hour after Newswave went up, Nintendo announced a Direct. Just wasn't necessarily the event a lot of people were hoping to see, but we're going to talk a little bit about that here, as well as what's already leaked out early. Also, we are going to be talking about a new report that's pointing towards Nintendo bringing back a big franchise for this holiday season, and we're also going to be talking about Final Fantasy and the reason, at least according to Yoshida himself, as to why the entire franchise has moved away from that traditional turn-based battle system. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton, and if you're new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. We're going to start today with a bit of a reminder. Yes, there is a Nintendo Direct happening an hour after this Newswave goes up. We can see this posted up over on Nintendo of America's Twitter, saying a new Nintendo Direct Mini partner showcase is on the way. Watch on demand via our YouTube channel beginning Tuesday, June 28th at 6 a.m. Pacific Time, 9 a.m. Eastern for roughly 25 minutes of info on upcoming third-party Nintendo Switch games. Now, very important to note here, it will not be a live stream that they do, not like a premiere or anything. They're just going to drop the Direct Mini outright. So you could technically skip to the end, the middle, wherever, and just see what announcement is coming up. You don't have to kind of hang out and wait for the entire premiere or live stream to take place. It would have been interesting, I will admit, if they had just dropped this today, like just out of nowhere, boom, there's the Direct Mini. Instead, they wanted to at least put a warning out there, which tells me that there probably is some substantial game in here, and I will talk about one that, yes, that is leaked early, a little later on in the show, but immediately as soon as this was announced, people weren't too happy that it's not the big general Direct, but the third-party Directs like these tend to be kind of interesting because we don't know what is going to be there. Now, afterwards, we might look back on it and say that was disappointing, but at least the build up to it, it's anyone's guess as to what we could see here. Also, we do know that No Man's Sky is coming out on the Switch later on this year, and it's also going to get a physical copy on the PlayStation 5, which is good to see. However, one major feature appears to just be missing from the Switch version, at least for now. We can see this over on Eurogamer. They say No Man's Sky out in October on Switch will be single player only at launch. This is something they noticed on the Nintendo page, that there's no mention of online multiplayer at all. Now, this was added to other platforms in July of 2018, which basically means you can play with your friends online and do things like explore, of course, the universe. You can battle, you can build, all kinds of cool stuff there. Won't be included, as they say, at launch, so maybe it will get some sort of update down the road, which, to be fair with Hello Games, they've done a pretty good job supporting No Man's Sky, taking it from that disastrous launch and turning it into a game that has a legitimate community backing it. So, I mean, we'll see what happens here after it comes out. It's just kind of a shame that we won't be able to play online with your friends immediately at launch No Man's Sky on the Switch like you can other platforms. Oh, and if you're someone who's still waiting on your Steam Deck to arrive or just get that awesome order confirmation email, I have some good news for you. You can see this over on the Steam Deck Twitter account saying, hello, some great news on the production front. We just sent the last batch of Q2 emails and we'll start sending Q3 reservation emails on the 30th. Production has picked up, and after today, we'll be shipping more than double the number of Steam Decks every single week. This is great news. Obviously, for people who are still waiting for their Steam Deck, sounds like that queue, they're going to get through that even faster now. And I am curious how the Steam Deck will continue to sell as we get to a point where maybe they can stock them in stores. If they can finally get through the large line now and just have them available on their own Steam page, you just go there, click it, add to cart, and it ships out immediately. Maybe they will work to put it in places like Best Buy, Walmart, or others. So yeah, hey, good news there. Keep an eye out on your email because it seems like things are indeed ramping up on the production side for the Steam Deck. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with that Nintendo Direct Mini. Like I said, an hour after this video goes live, we will have that dropped on demand and you can jump around and see what's in there. But we do have an indication now as to a few announcements that will most likely be part of this Direct Mini partner showcase. And after seeing this, it does appear like I think it's going to be one of the better Direct Mini partner showcases, but take a look at this as an example. We did talk about the journalist over the weekend who essentially mentioned that this probably would be mostly just all third-party games. They talked about Persona as well as a game that would finally make its way to the Switch after being out for about 4 years. They came back and said about 2017 to 2018, somewhere in there, and then they dropped this tweet here basically saying, hey, it's going to be Nier related. Oh, and also this kind of falls in line with Nier Automata, which, wow, that'll be an interesting one to see on the Switch. I mean, it makes sense. I have questions around the performance of that game on the Switch, but hey, if they can make it work and it runs well enough, that's a pretty cool game to have as like a portable experience there. And yeah, why not move to the Switch and see what happens? I assume Platinum Games will be working with Square to make that happen. Or who knows? Maybe Square will have a different port company working on it to move it over. So we'll see about that one. But let's talk about like the big game that I think will be the closeout actually for this Direct Mini Showcase. And that is from Ubisoft. They just updated their site by accident, and well, here we are. Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope Gold Edition. So I guess there will be some like bigger edition you could pay extra money for to get maybe just advantages immediately in the game, different items. But next to that was the release date of October 20th. And it's funny because yesterday I filmed a video on the Spawnwave Plus channel as the Direct was like announced, and I want to just go over it a little bit in kind of breaking news setup. I mentioned that Mario and Rabbids Sparks of Hope would make sense in October. Here we are. Well, we also had some screenshots that was shared up on Twitter by Koopa Kid, grabbing them before the section of the Ubisoft site was pulled down. And these are the new Mario Rabbids screenshots showing off Bowser as a playable character. And you know what? These screenshots look really good. Mario Rabbids Kingdom Battle was a good-looking game at the time because, remember, it showed up early on in the Switch's life, and Ubisoft having an entire team dedicated to building this game out specifically for the Switch alongside Nintendo, I'm expecting this game to actually look really, really good. So you take Nier Automata, some of the Persona games, Mario Rabbids Sparks of Hope to close things out, and a couple other games sprinkled along the way, like a Tactics Ogre. That'd be pretty cool. I think this could end up being a good partner showcase. It's one of the longest ones, like it's 25 minutes. It might actually be the longest partner showcase for the Direct Mini section. But again, there's a lot of stuff to narrow it down with all these different like stipulations of partner showcase, Direct Mini, and all of this. You throw GoldenEye though in there in the mix, and that is going to be a pretty good presentation. But as usual with Directs, the expectations should be a bit lower for something like a Mini. And it seems like for a lot of people, they're just completely through the floor. So you figure, hey, people won't really be able to be disappointed after it airs, but hey, let's face it, it's the Nintendo Direct, it's the internet. They'll probably be disappointed somehow. Also, let's talk about this Nintendo franchise that appears set for a return later this year as one of Nintendo's holiday games that are not officially announced yet, but it's one that's been talked about for a while, and we now have Jeff Grubb, I mean, just going on record saying I'm almost positive, 100% positive this game is going to make the cut for 2022, and that is Metroid Prime Remastered. I say it's like a Nintendo franchise making a return because while we had Metroid Dread, Metroid Prime with these 3D first-person shooter adventure games for Metroid, way different, like significantly so. I mean, to the point where Nintendo couldn't even make it themselves. It's a first-person shooter. Nintendo isn't really good at that at all, and it seems like they messed it up, rebooted it, handed it off to Retro Studios, who does know how to make a first-person shooter Metroid game, as they have been doing since 2002 on the GameCube. Wait a minute. It's going to be 20 years, actually, this holiday since Metroid Prime first released. Seems like maybe a good time to drop it as an anniversary thing. Well, we can see this transcribed by Nintendo Life. This is from Jeff Grubb over on the Game Mess Morning Show. This was Giant Bomb. It says, I could say that I've been told pretty definitively that Metroid Prime Remastered is going to be one of their big holiday games. In the past, this is something I've heard is in the works. They've had things happening with that game. Now I've been told that their plans are to release that game this holiday. I think almost certainly to line up with the 20th anniversary in November. So that's happening, and they need to tell us when that release date is. And what's interesting here is Jeff also talked about plans for Metroid Prime 2 and Metroid Prime 3. He thinks they're going to be coming later on, with Metroid Prime Remastered being its own SKU. He says they're also pretty much done, it sounds like, but Nintendo being Nintendo is going to hold on to them and will likely drop them later along the road. However Nintendo decides in what order to release their games, they are going to do that, but they're going to do it separately, it sounds like. So the idea here is Metroid Prime, the first one, would have a remaster treatment, I think similar to what we saw with Xenoblade Definitive Edition, where people will argue back and forth, is it a remake, is it a remaster? It's going to be Metroid Prime, but look way better, I would assume, right? But not quite to the point where we see Last of Us Part 1. They themselves say they're building it, rebuilding it from the ground up and all of this. But Metroid Prime on the GameCube already looks good. Like, you can still play it through an HDMI adapter on your GameCube. Yes, I understand it's not going to push 1080p or anything there natively, but it still looks great. I mean, the GameCube version of Metroid Prime, you could kind of mix it up for an Xbox 360 game if you had like AV cables like to match and everything. It's a very good looking game. Retro Studios did an awesome job back then, 60 FPS, the whole deal there. But if they go back and they dress it up, make it look better, it is a good way to get people reacclimated or even introduced to this franchise. I mean, 20 years. I've talked about this many, many times. New gamers cycle in, and their first system might be the Xbox 360, the PS3, or even the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. I will admit, though, I'm a little curious why Nintendo is just splitting these games up, where Metroid Prime 2 and 3 would just be off on their own. Maybe the work done to Metroid Prime Remastered, in their mind, is enough for it to stand as its own $60 game. It just seems strange, because Metroid Prime 3 is going to need a lot of work when it comes down to the controls and even some of the setups, considering they would expect you to have the pointer controls. I'm not talking about like the gyroscope or gyro controls with a Switch Joy-Con. No, like the actual pointer controls that are more accurate. So it's strange that they would go that route, unless they just want $60 for Prime Remastered and then $60 for Metroid Prime 2 and 3. So $120 for the entire trilogy. Actually sounds like something a corporation would do. But either way, I think if Nintendo can set themselves up with some pretty good third-party announcements here today, especially with Mario plus Rabbids, and then they have Bayonetta 3 get dated down the road, maybe through a Twitter reveal, and then they have Metroid Prime Remastered, maybe also get a Twitter reveal, they could have a pretty good holiday 2022 overall. So we'll see what the plans are after today unfolds with this Direct Mini. Next up, let's talk about Last of Us Part 1. We did have some new details come out over the weekend as different elements were spotted on the PlayStation Direct website. This gives us a bit more insight into how, say, the controller with that DualSense will be used, and even the file size. Let's head over here to the PlayStation Direct website, starting with the haptic feedback, saying that the controller supports haptic feedback for every weapon and environmental effects such as the sensation of falling rain. This is something we had in Returnal, actually, where you would feel kind of raindrops as that was happening on the back of the controller, which was, it was a cool sensation. So I'm curious how they will implement maybe some of the other effects here in the game. The adaptive triggers is something that was pointed out before, but they say feel dynamic DualSense wireless controller trigger resistance for all the Last of Us iconic weapons. That includes Joel's revolver and Ellie's bow. The bow is the one thing that was pointed out by Sony immediately when the DualSense was introduced, and they continue to do something like that here. I mean, it's an easy way to show off the DualSense and the tension it creates with those triggers. And they also mentioned the 3D audio. Naughty Dog's newly upgraded audio engine makes use of the Tempest 3D audio tech to deliver richer soundscapes through compatible stereo headphones, analog or USB, or even the TV speakers. Remember, they had that firmware update that allows just your regular speakers on your TV to give you that kind of that same audio 3D sensation. And the file size, it's 79 gigabytes, which is almost double. The Last of Us Remastered on the PS4 is about 48 gigabytes, so almost double what we had with Last of Us Remastered on the PS4. We know they're going to be pushing the visuals after they're doing this full remake from the ground up, so textures and all these different things being updated will, I'm sure, add to that file size. But what Sony has now with the Ultra HD Blu-rays, where they don't have to pack in 2 Blu-rays, they can just do one that can hold up to 100 gigabytes. We will continue to see more and more of these larger file sizes. I mean, we already kind of thought we had large file sizes last generation. they're just going to continue to get larger and larger with these first-party titles. I know, like, even Horizon from Midwest was pretty large, but when you have 100 gigabytes to play around with on a disc and you want to push the envelope with 4K textures and visuals and audio and all this, yeah, that file size will continue to balloon, even though we are taking advantage of an SSD now, which means redundant files are not needed anymore. Doesn't really matter, at least it hasn't mattered here for some of these big first-party releases. But I think the DualSense is one of the best ways they can kind of separate or at least differentiate Last of Us Part 1 from Last of Us Remastered, so I hope they do take advantage of that big feature with the DualSense controller, and we'll find out more about that, I'm sure, when it releases in September. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about Final Fantasy XVI, because something we've all noticed is that the combat is, well, it's way different than what we may have grown up with for Final Fantasy, the classic command-based, turn-based RPG. Not the case. This looks like it's going to be more or less like Devil May Cry 5. And again, that's what a lot of people are drawing comparisons to because of the fast-paced action and the real-time combat. Well, Mr. Yoshida was asked about this, like, hey, why are you guys going away from what made Final Fantasy popular back in the 90s and the early 2000s with something like Final Fantasy X? Well, this is what he had to say. One thing that we found recently is that as graphics get better and better, and as characters become more realistic and more photoreal, is that the combination of that realism with the very unreal sense of turn-based commands doesn't really fit together. You have this kind of strange gap that emerges. Some people are fine with it. They're fine with having these realistic characters in this Unreal type of system, but then on the other hand, there are people that just can't get over it. I mean, if you have a character holding a gun, why can't you just press the button to have the gun fire? Why do you need a command in there? And so it becomes a question of not right or wrong, but it becomes a question of preference for each different player. So that is an interesting concept to consider there, because for me, I really wouldn't mind, like, I'm already understanding of how the command-based system works, where everyone stands around as I scroll through my menu and pick what I want all of my characters to do, and the enemies are very polite, and they'll just stand over there while I'm doing this, and then we run through all of our turns. Whereas now, again, a younger generation maybe that comes in doesn't really understand because, well, they didn't grow up with it back when it maybe looked a little less unrealistic all the way around. I mean, you see what Final Fantasy XVI looks like. It looks incredible. The visuals now are like through the roof. So yeah, I guess that would look kind of weird. And I'm sure they have done focus group testing quite a bit to figure this out, to where, I mean, I've said it before, they're going for that mainstream audience with these games that have massive budgets behind them. I mean, again, you see what they look like. You see the amount of time it takes to develop this. They want to sell 10 million plus copies. Will they be able to do that if they continue along the path of what we've seen with Octopath Traveler? Probably not, just the way the overall market has evolved. Which is why if we want more of these turn-based RPGs, we have to look to developers like Team Asano, right? Like they're clearly trying to keep the traditional turn-based, strategy-based even RPGs around, whereas on the other side, these big budget games have to more or less lean into the mainstream, which means they have to become more action and real-time oriented, and that's just kind of how it appears, especially with some of these latest comments from Mr. Yoshida. But let me know what you think about that. Is that something you hadn't considered? It's like, oh wait, yeah, it looks very realistic, very fluid, and then everyone just kind of stops and stands around while I pick through these menus. And before we go to the comment of the day, we're gonna take a look at the poll they posted up yesterday. We're asked, late ports still get announced for the Switch all the time. Do you wait for a third-party game to come to Switch, even if it's not yet announced, before playing it? 67% said no, 33% said yes. And I think there are a couple of scenarios here where you would wait anyway, because like the Switch might be your only system. Like, yeah, that could definitely happen. Or it might be the only system that fits your current lifestyle now. Like, the portable aspect of the Switch has to be taken into consideration when it comes down to this, because some people just aren't able to sit down for hours at a time and play a game on a TV, or they travel a lot and the Switch going with them is much easier, or maybe they play games before bed and they just kind of hang out in bed and play their Switch for half an hour or so, right? Like, and then obviously the JRPG side of things where you need hundreds of hours dumped into them, sometimes easier to pick up and play a system like the Switch. So like Persona, I get why some people would just kind of hang out and say, I'll play it if it ever comes to the Switch. But me personally, if there's a game that I really want to play and it's, say, not on the Switch or not on some other system, I just go where the game is, and that's kind of it because I want to play it. But let me know about this one in the comments, 'cause I was very curious if people will wait years to play something like Nier Automata. I mean, the game sells, these different late ports do sell, and I figure Nier would as well, so I guess some people are. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Junk saying, I'm curious to see if Armored Core will sell based on the company name alone or not. I mean, they could obviously put it over in the trailer, make it look really, really cool, maybe Gundam-esque in some regards, but this is where FromSoft's name would really come into play, and if they have grown that backing that I think they have with the Souls releases and Elden Ring, would that same audience just follow to an Armored Core because it says From Software Presents, and they go, well, hold on, I'm gonna have to check this game out now because Elden Ring is great, or Bloodborne is awesome, and so on there. So, you know what? This would be a great test all the way around for Armored Core if people would actually be interested in it, and if FromSoft's name is strong enough to pull people to it. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today, where it's Nintendo's 2022 with this Direct Mini closing later on today, and where we are with the roadmap. How do you think things are shaping up if you maybe drop a Metroid Prime remaster and a Bayonetta 3 in there? And then also, what about Final Fantasy 16 and some of those comments from Mr. Yoshida about the presentation getting into a certain level where it doesn't make sense for a command-based system that has your characters standing around during battle? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.